The evening lights shimmered across the grand ballroom of the Royal Crest Hotel. The air was filled with laughter, perfume, and the quiet clinking of expensive glassware. Guests arrived in shiny cars, stepping out in glittering dresses and tailored suits. Cameras flashed near the entrance as famous faces smiled and posed for photos before walking in. Inside, waiters moved swiftly between the guests, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was a charity gala, one of the biggest of the year, and everyone who was anyone was there. Among the swirl of elegance, one woman entered quietly. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or heavy jewelry. Her dress was simple, light blue in color with soft fabric that moved gently when she walked. Her shoes weren't high heels but plain flats that looked comfortable. Her hair was tied neatly in a bun, and the only piece of jewelry she wore was a small silver bracelet. She looked out of place in that glittering crowd. As she walked in, some people turned their heads. A few ladies standing near the entrance exchanged glances, whispering behind their perfectly manicured hands. One of them chuckled softly and said, "Did someone's assistant take a wrong turn?" The others laughed, pretending to sip their champagne. The woman didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, but she didn't let it show. She smiled politely at the staff who greeted her and walked slowly into the ballroom, looking around with quiet curiosity. The lights, the music, the chatter, everything was dazzling, but she didn't seem overwhelmed. She just carried herself with a calm, gentle grace. At one of the tables, a small group of wealthy socialites sat gossiping. They had already noticed her the moment she walked in. "Look at that dress," one of them whispered, smirking. "I think I've seen that design in a thrift store." The others giggled. Another woman leaned forward and added, "Who even invited her? She looks like she wandered in from the staff entrance." The mockery continued in hushed tones as the woman found her seat near the corner of the room. She didn't sit at one of the front tables where the high-profile guests were placed, but somewhere quieter, where she could observe without drawing attention. She looked around, smiling softly at the sight of everyone enjoying themselves. When the waiters came by to offer drinks, she thanked them kindly. One of the servers, a young man nervously balancing a tray of glasses, almost spilled champagne near her. Instead of being upset, she helped him steady the tray and gave him a reassuring smile. "It's all right," she said gently. "No harm done." The young man smiled back, grateful. That simple kindness didn't go unnoticed by an older gentleman sitting nearby, who had been observing her from a distance. But across the room, the gossip continued. "She must be someone's distant relative," one woman said. "Or maybe a guest who wasn't supposed to come." The others laughed. "If she's here for free food, she's in the wrong place," another added cruelly. The woman didn't engage with anyone yet. She sat quietly, watching the stage where the event host was welcoming guests and talking about the purpose of the charity, raising funds for hospitals and schools. Her eyes brightened when she heard that part. She clapped softly, genuinely moved, while others only clapped because it was expected. Later, during dinner, the tables filled with chatter about expensive vacations, new cars, and designer collections. The woman's table was no different. A lady wearing a diamond necklace leaned toward her and asked, "So what do you do?" Her tone carried polite curiosity, but her eyes were scanning the woman's simple dress with judgment. The woman smiled faintly. "I'm involved in some projects," she replied. "What kind of projects?" The lady pressed. "Mostly development work," she said, "helping build schools and hospitals in small towns." The others at the table paused for a moment, then one of them forced a smile. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said in a tone that clearly meant the opposite. Another laughed lightly and asked, "And do you fund those things yourself, or do you work for someone?" "I try to fund what I can," the woman answered calmly. "It's something close to my heart." The table went quiet for a second, then the topic shifted. The others began talking about their upcoming trips and which luxury brands were releasing new collections. The woman simply listened, occasionally smiling, never interrupting. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She just wanted to be part of the evening quietly. During one part of the dinner, a socialite accidentally dropped her clutch bag near the woman's chair. The woman bent down immediately, picked it up, and handed it back with a kind smile. Instead of thanking her, the woman just nodded stiffly and muttered, "Thanks," as if it were a chore to say. Her friends giggled again once the woman turned away. When dessert was served, a photographer came around taking pictures of each table. When it was their turn, the photographer asked the group to pose. The socialites arranged themselves perfectly, and then looked awkwardly at the simple woman sitting with them. One of them leaned toward her and said quietly, "Maybe let us take this one alone, dear. It's for the press." The woman nodded without any sign of offense and stepped aside. The photographer looked unsure, but she smiled and told him, "It's all right. Go ahead." The photo was taken full of smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The woman watched from the corner with calm acceptance. The older gentleman, who had been observing everything from another table, noticed again. He had seen enough events like this to know how people treated those who didn't fit their mold. After a while, the music began. A live band played soft tunes and couples danced under the warm golden lights. The woman stayed at her table, enjoying the melody. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music carry her away. She looked peaceful, almost glowing in that stillness. Nearby, one of the socialites nudged another and said, "She's sitting all alone. Maybe she doesn't know anyone here." Another replied, "Of course she doesn't. People like her don't belong in places like this." They laughed again, unaware that their words revealed more about them than about her. Just then, the host of the evening walked up to the microphone and thanked everyone for attending. He spoke about the importance of generosity and how the event was made possible because of donors who believed in helping others. The woman listened closely, her eyes soft but filled with quiet strength. While others chatted and scrolled through their phones, she was fully present. She didn't need attention. She didn't need anyone's approval. There was something deeply grounded about her, something the others couldn't see because they were too focused on appearances. As the night went on, a small mishap occurred. One of the serving trays slipped from a waiter's hand near the center of the ballroom, scattering glasses on the floor. Everyone gasped, some even groaned in irritation. But before the staff could clean it up, the woman from the corner got up and helped gather the broken pieces. "Be careful," she said softly to the waiter. "You don't want to cut yourself." People stared. Some were shocked that she would kneel down in that expensive venue. The waiter tried to stop her, saying, "Please, ma'am, it's all right. I'll handle it." But she smiled and said, "I've had my share of broken glass too." Her tone was gentle, not dramatic, just kind. The elderly gentleman who had been watching her finally stood and walked over. He helped her up and said, "You have a rare heart." She smiled back modestly. "Just doing what anyone should do," she replied. But not everyone would. Not in that crowd. As the evening came to an end, she quietly thanked the hosts, congratulated the performers, and wished the waiters a good night. While others rushed to get photos or show off their luxury cars, she walked out calmly into the night air. The staff who had seen her kindness waved goodbye with warm smiles. Inside the ballroom, some of the socialites watched her leave. One of them shrugged and said, "Well, that was strange." Another replied, "Who cares? She'll be forgotten by tomorrow." They laughed again, clinking their glasses. But what they didn't know was that the woman they had mocked so freely was far from ordinary. The very event they attended, the glamorous charity gala they so proudly boasted about, had been made possible because of her silent generosity. The biggest donation of the evening came from her foundation, under a name few recognized. She didn't come for attention. She didn't come for fame. She came to see the people who claimed to care about the cause she quietly supported. And tonight, she had seen enough. As she stepped into her car and the driver opened the door for her, the night breeze touched her face. She looked back at the shining building one last time, smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "Kindness never goes unnoticed even when the eyes around you are blind." Then she drove away, leaving behind a room full of people who had no idea who they had just met. The next morning, the sun rose over the quiet city streets, washing the skyline in soft gold. The same people who had attended the grand charity gala were waking up to their usual lives, sipping coffee in marble kitchens, posting pictures of their expensive outfits, and talking about how wonderful the night had been. But their conversations weren't about the cause they had supported. They were about the people, the gossip, and especially about the woman in the simple blue dress. Messages flew around in private group chats. "Did you see that woman last night?" One message read, "Who even invited her?" Another replied, "Someone even sent a photo taken secretly during the event, zoomed in on her plain shoes and modest hairstyle." The comments that followed were full of laughter and mockery. They didn't even know her name, yet she had become the subject of their amusement. One of them wrote, "She looked like she came straight from the bus station." And the group chat erupted with emojis. It was cruel, but to them it was just harmless gossip. Another way to feel superior. While all that talk continued, the woman from the gala, the one they laughed at, woke up quietly in her small but elegant home. She didn't have gold furniture or crystal chandeliers. Her home was simple but full of warmth. The walls were lined with photographs, children smiling in front of new schools, villagers standing proudly beside fresh water wells, nurses in small clinics that she had helped fund. Each photo told a story of a life changed, and every face held genuine gratitude. She sat at her wooden dining table with a cup of tea, looking over some papers, reports from the charity foundations she supported. She read through them carefully, marking notes with a pencil. She didn't need assistance to handle everything. She liked to stay involved personally. She wasn't a woman who flaunted her success. She believed in quiet impact. Her phone rang. It was the event organizer from the previous night. "I just wanted to thank you again for attending," he said warmly. "It was an honor having you there. Everyone was surprised to see you." She smiled softly and replied, "It was a lovely evening. I'm glad it raised awareness for the cause." After she hung up, she thought about the people she met that night. She remembered their cold smiles and the whispers behind her back. It didn't hurt her anymore. She had seen that kind of behavior before. She knew that some people saw the world only through the lens of status and appearance. But part of her still hoped that one day they would learn that kindness and humility were worth more than diamonds and brand names. Later that afternoon, she visited one of her community projects on the outskirts of the city. It was a half-built school, buzzing with workers and laughter from children running nearby. When the children saw her, they came running. "You're here," they shouted with excitement. She bent down to hug them, smiling as they proudly showed her their drawings and books. One of the teachers walked up to her and said, "You have no idea how much your help has changed this place. Before we had nothing. Now these children have hope." She smiled warmly and replied, "Hope is the most beautiful thing we can build." Her voice was soft but full of sincerity. Meanwhile, far away from that construction site filled with laughter, the socialites were busy planning another weekend gathering. The memory of the gala was still fresh in their minds, and the mysterious woman had become their favorite topic. "She looked so calm for someone so out of place," one woman said while trying on jewelry in a boutique. "I almost felt bad for her." Another chuckled and said, "Don't. People like her don't belong at those events. I heard she was someone's guest, maybe a last-minute invite." Their laughter echoed through the store. The sales staff smiled politely, pretending not to hear. But one young employee who had served at the gala recognized who they were talking about. She had seen that same woman quietly help the waiters clean up the broken glasses. The memory made her smile. She wanted to speak up but stayed quiet, knowing her words wouldn't matter to people like that. Days went by and the gossip slowly faded. But fate has a way of bringing things full circle. A week later, the same group of wealthy women received an exclusive invitation. It was for a private gathering organized by one of the city's biggest charitable foundations. The letter mentioned that a special benefactor would be attending, someone whose donations had made a major difference in the lives of thousands. Excited to meet this mysterious figure, they began preparing for the evening like it was a royal event. They spent days choosing gowns, booking makeup artists, and planning how to impress the crowd. None of them suspected that the same woman they had mocked at the last gala would be there again, and this time in a very different light. The night of the event arrived. The venue was smaller than the previous gala, but even more elegant. Candles flickered in crystal holders and soft music played in the background. Guests whispered in excitement about the anonymous donor, who was said to be one of the richest yet most private people in the country. When the woman entered the hall, the whispers began again, though this time they sounded different. People turned to look at her, some recognizing her from the previous event. She wore another simple dress, white this time, with a small brooch on her shoulder. No jewelry, no glitter, just the same calm elegance she always carried. The socialites spotted her too, their faces twisted in disbelief. "Not her again," one muttered under her breath. She's following these events now? Another woman smirked and said, maybe she likes pretending to be part of our circle. They laughed quietly, unaware of how wrong they were. As the evening went on, the guests mingled and the host prepared to make a big announcement. The socialites sipped their champagne, watching the woman from afar. One of them decided to approach her. "Well, you again," she said with a sweet but fake smile. "I didn't expect to see you here. You must really enjoy these charity things." The woman smiled politely. "I do," she said. "Helping others is something I deeply care about." "How lovely," the socialite replied in a tone dripping with sarcasm. "Though you should know these events are quite high profile. Sometimes people find it hard to fit in." The woman didn't react to the insult. She simply said, "I think kindness fits in anywhere." Then she turned her attention to the stage where the host was stepping up to speak. The socialite rolled her eyes and whispered to her friend, "Did you hear that? Kindness fits in anywhere. How poetic." They giggled quietly, covering their mouths like mischievous children. The host tapped the microphone, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we want to recognize a very special person. Someone whose generosity and heart have made a difference in countless lives. For years this person has chosen to remain anonymous, letting the work speak for itself. But tonight we have convinced her to accept a small moment of appreciation." Everyone leaned forward in curiosity. The host smiled and said, "Please join me in welcoming our most extraordinary benefactor. The woman whose foundation built over 20 schools, 3 hospitals and countless shelters, Miss Lena." The applause started slowly, then erupted into thunder. The guests turned their heads toward the quiet woman in white. The same one who had been mocked, laughed at, and whispered about. She stood still, her face calm but her eyes warm as the host gestured for her to come forward. The socialites froze in disbelief. Their glasses trembled slightly in their hands. One of them whispered, "Did he just say, her?" Another muttered, "That can't be true." But it was true. As she walked toward the stage, every step echoed louder than the applause. The same people who had ridiculed her appearance now clapped for her, though their smiles were filled with shock. She accepted the award with quiet grace and said only a few words. "I never give to be recognized. I give because I once had nothing. And someone once gave me hope. I only wish to pass that hope forward." The room was silent. Her words were simple, but they struck deep. That night the gossip stopped. The laughter faded. The women who had mocked her couldn't meet her eyes. They realized that beneath her simple clothes was more wealth and more heart than they had ever known. But Lena didn't hold grudges. She smiled kindly at everyone before leaving the stage as if nothing had ever happened. Her humility was more powerful than any revenge. Outside, as she left the venue, the same young staff who had admired her before whispered to one another, "That's her. She's the one who built those schools," and she simply smiled, stepping into her car as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind a room full of people who finally understood that wealth wasn't about money, but the size of one's heart. The morning after the second charity event felt peaceful. The air was clear, the city slowly waking up, unaware that one quiet woman had just changed many hearts the night before. The papers had started writing about her. Headlines read, "Mysterious donor revealed," and "The woman behind the schools and hospitals." But she wasn't reading any of it. She didn't care for fame or attention. She was sitting on her balcony sipping tea, surrounded by the gentle hum of birds and sunlight touching the leaves. Her assistant came by to deliver some updates about the charity work, but she stopped him before he could begin listing numbers. "Tell me about the people," she said softly. "Not the figures." He smiled and nodded. "The hospital wing we funded last year is now treating over 200 patients every week. The teachers at the new school say the children are learning faster than ever. And the village water project, people are calling it a miracle." She smiled, her eyes warm with gratitude. "That's what matters most," she whispered. While her world was calm, the socialites who once mocked her were living in quiet embarrassment. Their usual group chats had gone silent for days. They didn't know what to say. Every time one of them thought about the gala, they remembered the way they had laughed at her. The memory stung more than they wanted to admit. One of them, the same woman who had spoken rudely to her, sat in her large living room reading the newspaper. The photo on the front page was unmistakable, the woman she mocked smiling shyly as she received the award. The caption read, "A woman whose kindness changed thousands of lives." She sighed deeply and folded the paper. For the first time, she felt something new. Regret. She thought about how she had treated her, how cruel her words sounded now. That night, she told her husband, "I think I've been living wrong." He looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked. She shook her head and said quietly, "We care too much about things that don't matter." Meanwhile, the woman who had been mocked, the same one whose kindness now filled the news, decided to visit one of the hospitals she had helped build. It was located on the edge of a small town, surrounded by green fields and dusty roads. When she arrived, the staff and patients greeted her with bright smiles. Children waved from the courtyard, calling her Auntie. She laughed gently, waving back. One little girl ran up and hugged her tightly, holding a small drawing in her hand. "I made this for you," the girl said proudly. It was a picture of a hospital, a sun, and people smiling. She knelt down to the child's level and said softly, "It's beautiful. Thank you." Inside, she walked through the wards, greeting patients and listening to their stories. A nurse told her about a young boy who had recovered after months of illness because of the new medical equipment they were able to buy with her donations. She listened carefully, asking questions, her eyes full of genuine care. While she was there, a reporter arrived, hoping for an interview. He approached her politely and asked, "People are calling you a modern-day angel. How does it feel to be so loved?" She smiled lightly and said, "I'm no angel. I just believe that when you have more than you need, you should share it. Wealth means nothing if it doesn't help others live better." The reporter paused and said, "Many wealthy people donate, but very few stay humble. You never put your name on any of the buildings you funded. Why?" She looked out the window at the children playing in the courtyard. "Because it's not about me," she said. "It's about them. Their laughter is enough of a reward." That simple answer spread across social media later that day. People were inspired. Many wrote comments like, "The world needs more people like her, and this is what true kindness looks like." But not everyone was happy reading the news. One of the socialites from the gala felt jealousy creeping in. She couldn't accept that someone so ordinary had become the center of attention. She told her friends she's probably doing this for fame. "No one gives away that much money without wanting something in return," her friend replied quietly, but she didn't even tell anyone who she was until they found out themselves. The jealous woman rolled her eyes. Still, there's always a reason. Nobody is that perfect. But deep inside, even she knew her words were hollow. A few days later, fate brought them all together again. A well-known businessman announced another charity fundraiser, and everyone in that social circle was invited, including the woman they once mocked. She didn't plan on going, but the event organizer personally called her and said, "Your presence would mean a lot. It might inspire others to give more." So, she agreed. She arrived quietly again, in a soft gray dress with the same calm grace. When she entered, the room fell silent for a moment. People who once ignored her now stood to greet her. The same socialites who laughed behind her back were suddenly polite and overly friendly. One of them walked up with a nervous smile and said, "It's so good to see you again. You look lovely tonight." She could sense the guilt in their tone, but she didn't hold it against them. "Thank you," she said kindly. "It's nice to see everyone here supporting a good cause." During the event, the host invited her to sit beside him at the main table. She politely declined at first, saying she was fine at her corner seat, but he insisted. Everyone was watching now. The same woman who had been looked down upon was being treated like a guest of honor. Dinner began, and conversations flowed more respectfully this time. But there was still an air of curiosity. People wanted to know more about her, how she became wealthy, where she came from, what she did before all this. She never bragged. She just spoke softly about her beginnings, how she had grown up in a small house, how her parents taught her the value of hard work and kindness, and how her first success came not from chasing money, but from helping others succeed. Her words weren't fancy, but they carried truth. Even those who didn't like her couldn't help but listen. Halfway through the evening, the same socialite who had once mocked her stood up and approached her. She looked nervous, holding a glass of water tightly. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly, "for how I treated you before. I was wrong. The woman smiled gently and replied, "You don't need to apologize. Sometimes we see things only from the surface." "I've done that too once." Her response was kind, not proud. The socialite's eyes softened. "You really are different," she said. "I wish I had your heart." The woman smiled again and said, "We all have it. We just forget to use it." The rest of the night went by peacefully. When she left, several people followed her to the door. Not to mock her this time, but to thank her. Not just for her donations, but for reminding them of something they had forgotten: humanity. Later that night, as she sat alone in her car, the driver glanced at her through the mirror and said softly, "You changed people tonight." "Ma'am," she smiled faintly and said, "No. They just remembered who they really are." The car drove through the quiet streets, the city lights reflecting in the windows. Somewhere far away, the same woman who had once laughed at her was sitting in her bedroom, scrolling through old pictures of the gala. She stopped at the one where the simple woman had been cropped out of their group photo. For the first time, she regretted doing that. She sent a message in the group chat saying, "We should invite her for lunch one day. Maybe we can learn something from her." No one replied right away, but the seed of change had been planted. Back in her home, the woman placed another framed photo on her wall. This time, it was a group of hospital nurses smiling beside their new ambulance. She looked at it for a long moment, feeling a quiet sense of peace. She didn't know what others said about her anymore. She didn't care. What mattered to her was that kindness was spreading, even if just a little, and hearts were softening. As she turned off the lights and walked toward her room, she thought of a simple truth her mother once told her. People may not remember what you wore or how you looked, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that was all she wanted, to make people feel seen, valued and loved no matter who they were. The next big charity event of the season was approaching. It was the most talked about gathering in the city, an annual gala known for attracting politicians, business magnates, and celebrities. The tickets alone cost more than what some people earned in a month, and every guest saw it as a stage to show their success. The same socialites who once mocked the simple woman were attending again, only this time they were careful about how they spoke of her. They had learned who she really was, a philanthropist whose quiet generosity had touched lives across the country. Yet despite their new politeness, many of them still didn't understand her. Some admired her humility, others felt awkward in her presence, and a few were simply curious about how she had become so wealthy while staying so modest. Whispers filled the room days before the event. "Will she come again?" one woman asked during a shopping trip. "I heard she might," another replied. "And if she does, I'm not making the same mistake twice." They laughed nervously, trying to sound casual, but there was a hint of guilt behind their laughter. When the evening finally arrived, the ballroom was even grander than before. Chandeliers sparkled like stars above, and a long red carpet led into the hall. Expensive perfumes filled the air. Cameras flashed as guests arrived in gowns that glittered like glass. At the far end of the room, the event's organizers were preparing for the highlight of the night: the announcement of a record-breaking donation that would fund new medical research and help hundreds of families. Nobody knew who the donor was. The organizers had kept the name secret, promising to reveal it only at the end of the night. The crowd was buzzing with excitement, speculating about which powerful figure had made the contribution. "It's probably one of the big investors," someone said. "Maybe that new billionaire from overseas," another guessed. The socialites, of course, had their own ideas. "It must be someone important," one of them said confidently. "You can tell by how secret they're being." As the guests chatted and posed for pictures, the woman they once laughed at entered quietly, just as she always did. Her dress was pale ivory, simple but elegant, the kind of beauty that didn't need attention. Her hair was pinned loosely, and she wore a calm smile that reached her eyes. She greeted the staff first, the doormen, the waiters, the organizers, thanking them sincerely for their work. Only after that did she step into the main hall. People noticed her instantly. Some whispered her name, others gave polite smiles, and a few quickly walked over to greet her. "It's so good to see you again," one of the socialites said, her tone overly sweet. "We were just talking about how wonderful your speech was last time." The woman smiled gently. "Thank you," she said. "I hope tonight brings even more support for those in need." They nodded eagerly, but beneath their smiles was nervousness. They couldn't forget how cruel they'd been before. Now, standing in front of her, they felt small. Dinner began soon after. The tables glowed with candlelight and soft music played in the background. The woman sat quietly, speaking to the elderly gentleman who had always treated her kindly. They talked about the progress of the schools and hospitals she supported. She mentioned how some of the children she helped had started getting scholarships to good universities. The old man smiled proudly. "You're changing the future," he said. "I'm just helping them find their way," she replied softly. At the other tables, conversations were louder. Some guests gossiped about her again, though their tone had changed. "She doesn't act rich at all," one man said in disbelief. "You'd think someone with her money would at least wear diamonds." A woman nearby replied, "Maybe that's why people respect her now." "She doesn't show off." The woman didn't hear any of it. Her focus was on the cause, not the crowd. She had seen too much in life to be distracted by opinions. As the evening went on, the host took the stage. The lights dimmed and the chatter slowly faded. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing through the hall, "tonight we gather not only to celebrate generosity, but also to recognize those who make real change possible. Every year we are blessed with supporters who go above and beyond to help others. But this year one person has truly stood out." The audience leaned forward in curiosity. Glasses stopped clinking, whispers quieted, and all eyes turned toward the stage. "This year's record-breaking donation," the host continued, "has funded the construction of 3 new hospitals, 10 rural schools, and multiple relief centers. It is the single largest private contribution our organization has ever received." The crowd gasped softly. People looked around, trying to guess who it could be. The host smiled and said, "And the generous donor behind this gift is someone many of you already know. Miss Lena." The applause started immediately. Some people stood clapping in admiration. Others were frozen in disbelief. The socialites who once mocked her exchanged looks of pure shock. One of them whispered, "Not again." She did it again. The woman rose slowly from her chair. She didn't look proud or surprised. She looked calm, almost humble. She walked toward the stage as the applause grew louder, each step steady and graceful. The host shook her hand warmly and handed her the microphone. She looked around the room, the chandeliers above, the faces staring back at her, some full of respect, others full of guilt. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried easily through the hall. "Thank you," she began. "I don't see this as my achievement. I see it as our shared responsibility. Every person here tonight has the power to change a life. Sometimes it takes only a little kindness." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I remember coming to my first gala and feeling invisible," she said quietly. "I saw laughter, beauty, and success, but not much compassion. And I realized something. True wealth is not what we wear or own, but what we give. Because what we give is what stays behind when we're gone." The room was silent. Not even the sound of a glass clinked. The socialites who once mocked her couldn't meet her eyes. Her words were gentle, but they struck deep. "I've met people who have nothing," she continued, "yet they still share the little they have. That's what inspired me. I hope tonight inspires you too, to give not for recognition, but because it's right." When she finished, the audience rose to their feet in applause. It wasn't the polite clapping from before. It was genuine. Even the ones who had once whispered cruel words were clapping now, some with tears in their eyes. After she stepped down from the stage, the elderly gentleman smiled and said, "You spoke from the heart, and they finally heard you." She smiled back, her eyes soft. "Maybe," she said, "but it's never about being heard. It's about planting a seed." Later that night, as guests began to leave, the same socialite who had mocked her at the first gala walked up to her again. This time she didn't have the fake smile or the perfect tone. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "I just want to say, I was wrong about you, about a lot of things." The woman smiled gently and replied, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." The socialite nodded, her eyes moist. "You've changed the way I see people," she said honestly. "I want to help too, and in any way I can." "That's a wonderful start," the woman said softly. "Helping others is the easiest way to heal yourself." As the last guest departed, she walked outside into the cool night. The city lights shimmered across the skyline, and a faint breeze moved through her hair. The driver opened the car door, but she stood there for a moment looking up at the stars. The night was quiet, but her heart was full. Inside the ballroom, the staff were cleaning up. One of the waiters, the same young man she had helped during the first gala, found a small note left on the table where she had been sitting. It said, "Thank you for your hard work tonight. Never forget that kindness builds the brightest futures." Next to it was an envelope with his name and a scholarship form inside. He stared at it in disbelief, realizing it was from her. His eyes filled with tears. Back at her home, she placed another photo on her wall. This one of the hospitals under construction, with workers smiling proudly beside a banner that read, "Hope lives here." She looked at it and whispered, "That's the real reward." In that moment, she didn't think about the laughter, the judgment, or the people who had doubted her. She thought about the lives that would be saved, the children who would learn, and the hope that would continue long after she was gone. That was her definition of wealth, the kind that could never be mocked or measured, because it was written not in numbers, but in the hearts of others. The night of the gala had ended, but its memory lingered in everyone's mind. People couldn't stop talking about the woman who had once been mocked, but later revealed herself as the biggest donor in the city's history. The next morning, news outlets began sharing her speech. Her calm voice, her soft smile, and her humble words were replayed on social media again and again. Some people watched it with admiration, others with guilt. Among them were the same socialites who had once made fun of her for wearing a plain dress and arriving alone. They were the ones who had laughed behind her back, whispering that she didn't belong. Now those same women and men couldn't bear to look at themselves in the mirror. At breakfast tables across the city, the conversation was the same. "Can you believe she's the one who built those hospitals?" one person said over coffee. "I heard she's even richer than the families who own half the city," another replied. "But she never shows it, not even a bodyguard or a driver with tinted windows." The story had spread beyond gossip. It had turned into a lesson. People admired her more for her simplicity than her wealth. What stood out most was how she never seemed to care about showing off her success. She had no desire to prove anything. Her quiet confidence made others feel small in comparison. Not because she wanted them to, but because her kindness exposed their own emptiness. A few days later, she received dozens of messages, invitations to more events, requests for interviews, offers from luxury brands who suddenly wanted her presence. She declined them all politely. Fame wasn't what she wanted. Her focus remained the same, helping others, quietly and sincerely. But for those who had once mocked her, the change in attitude came with discomfort. One of the socialites, who had made the cruelest jokes that night, couldn't sleep for days. Her husband had seen the viral video of the woman's speech and had asked her, "Isn't that the lady you laughed at last year?" She didn't know what to say. Her face burned with shame as she remembered every word she had said that evening. The sarcastic comments, the judgmental looks, the whispers about her dress. It haunted her now. She wished she could erase that night completely. Another woman from that same circle felt the same guilt. She had children of her own and couldn't stop thinking about how the woman's donations had helped build schools for kids who had nothing. Every time she looked at her own children, she thought of those who now had books and classrooms because of the woman she once ridiculed. Meanwhile, the woman herself had gone back to her usual routine. Her morning started early, often visiting construction sites of the schools and hospitals she funded. She spoke kindly to workers, asked about their families, and made sure everyone was treated fairly. She didn't wear expensive clothes or heavy jewelry. Instead, she wore comfortable clothes and a smile that made everyone feel respected. She believed that real wealth was measured in how many lives you could make better, not in the size of your house or the brand of your dress. One afternoon, as she visited a new hospital wing under construction, she saw a few familiar faces at the entrance. To her surprise, it was two of the socialites from the gala. They stood there nervously, holding small bouquets of flowers. When they saw her, they hesitated, unsure how to approach. She walked toward them, her expression warm and open. "Good afternoon," she said softly. "I didn't expect to see you here." One of them looked down, embarrassed. "We wanted to visit. And to say thank you," she said. "We saw what you've done here. It's beautiful." The woman smiled gently. I'm glad you think so. These places aren't about me, though. They're about the people who need them. The other socialite spoke quietly, her voice trembling. I also wanted to say sorry for how we treated you that night. We didn't know. The woman stopped her with a small nod. It's all right, she said. You don't have to explain. We all learn in different ways. Sometimes kindness teaches us more than pride ever could. They stood there silently for a moment, not knowing what else to say. The sound of hammers and voices from workers filled the air. The socialites looked around, at the clean white walls, the bright rooms being built, the children playing outside near the garden. And for the first time, they felt something they hadn't felt in years. Humility. Can we help? One of them asked softly. Maybe volunteer or contribute something. The woman smiled. Of course, she said. There's always room for good hearts. From that day, they started visiting more often. At first, it was uncomfortable. They weren't used to being around ordinary people without makeup, designer clothes, or fancy parties. But slowly, they began to change. They started helping with small tasks, organizing supplies, and even reading to children. The woman never treated them differently. She didn't remind them of their past behavior or make them feel guilty. Instead, she made them feel part of something good. And in that simple, gentle way, she taught them what real grace meant. Weeks passed, and the project was finally completed. The hospital's grand opening was scheduled, and the mayor himself came to cut the ribbon. Reporters and photographers filled the area, but the woman stood quietly at the back. She didn't like being in the spotlight. The mayor gave a long speech about how this hospital would save thousands of lives. When he thanked her for her generosity, she simply nodded and smiled. But what touched her most wasn't the applause or the praise. It was seeing those two socialites standing among the volunteers, genuinely helping and smiling without pretending. Later that day, after everyone had left, one of them approached her again. You changed everything for us, she said softly. I used to think happiness came from money and fame, but now I feel something different. Peace. And it's because of you. The woman shook her head gently. No, she said. It's because you opened your heart. That's where peace begins. Back in the city, more people started following her example. Business owners began funding small projects for local schools. Young people started organizing community events instead of lavish parties. Her story had spread further than she ever imagined, but she didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as just a person doing what was right. She once told a close friend, "If people laugh at your simplicity, let them." Simplicity keeps you grounded. The moment you start proving yourself to others, you lose who you are. Her words became a quiet reminder to everyone who met her. Months later, another charity gala was organized, even grander than before. The socialites who used to mock her were part of the planning committee this time. They made sure the event focused more on raising real help than showing off. The woman was invited again, but she didn't sit at the front table this time. She chose a small seat near the corner, next to the volunteers who had helped her at the hospital. When people noticed her there, they smiled and waved. Some came to thank her personally. The same socialites who had once looked down on her now treated her with genuine respect. They no longer cared about how she dressed or who she came with. They had finally understood that grace had nothing to do with appearance. That night, the event raised more funds than ever before. When the woman was asked to speak again, she kept it simple. We can't change the past, she said softly, but we can choose what kind of people we want to be from this moment on. And sometimes the biggest change starts with a small act of kindness. The hall was quiet, and then the applause began, loud, warm, and full of respect. No one saw her as a simple woman anymore. They saw her as someone whose heart was bigger than her fortune. When she left that night, the same people who once laughed behind her back now walked her to her car. They thanked her, they hugged her, and one of them whispered, "You made us better people." As her car drove away, She looked out at the glowing city lights and smiled softly to herself. The world still had arrogance and pride, but she had seen something stronger: change. And she knew that even if only a few hearts had opened, it was enough. Because kindness, once planted, spreads quietly but powerfully, just like she always believed. And from that night on, no one ever mocked her again, not because they feared her wealth, but because they finally understood her worth. Weeks had passed since the last charity event, but the woman's words were still echoing in people's hearts. Her story had spread far beyond the ballroom. It was no longer just about a rich woman who donated millions. It had become about humility, kindness, and the quiet strength that could change lives without raising a voice. In every corner of the city, people spoke about her differently now. The socialites who once mocked her had changed their ways. They had stopped competing over who wore the most expensive gown or carried the latest designer bag. Instead, they started competing in a new way, while in kindness. They wanted to be part of the good she had inspired. The woman, however, didn't see herself as a hero. Her days remained simple, her routine unchanged. Every morning she still woke up early, poured herself a cup of tea, and looked out at the garden behind her house. It was quiet there, a place where she could think and pray before starting her day. She believed peace came from small moments like that. One bright morning, she received an invitation from a university that wanted to honor her for her contributions to society. They planned to name a scholarship program after her, one that would help young students who couldn't afford education. She hesitated at first. She never liked public recognition. But when she learned that the scholarship would directly help children from the rural schools she had funded, she agreed. The ceremony was held outdoors, under large white tents decorated with flowers. Students lined up with handmade signs that said, "Thank you, and you changed our lives." When she arrived, the children ran to her, smiling brightly. One little boy handed her a small wrinkled drawing of a house with a garden and said shyly, "This is the hospital you built. My mother got better there." Her eyes softened as she looked at the picture. She bent down and hugged the boy. "Keep this," he said proudly. "It's my thank you gift." She held the drawing carefully as if it were more precious than gold. "I'll treasure it," she said softly. The university dean gave a long speech about how her donations had changed thousands of lives. Cameras clicked, but the woman didn't look toward them. Her attention was on the students, their faces filled with hope and dreams. When it was her turn to speak, she kept her words simple. "I never set out to be honored," she said. "I only wanted to help. When I was young, I didn't have much, but I had people who believed in me. That's what gave me strength. So now I try to be that person for others." Her voice was calm and her eyes glistened as she spoke. "You don't have to be rich to give. Sometimes a kind word or a helping hand can change someone's life. I learned that long ago, and I hope you carry it with you wherever you go." The crowd clapped warmly. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. Even the university professors and guests felt something shift inside them, a reminder of what really mattered. After the ceremony, as she was leaving, one of the reporters approached her. "You've inspired so many people," he said. "What's your secret? How do you stay so humble when you've achieved so much?" She smiled gently. "Because I remember what it feels like to have nothing," she replied. "And because I've learned that pride builds walls, but kindness builds bridges. I'd rather build bridges." The reporter nodded quietly, not sure what to say next. Her words carried more truth than any headline could ever describe. Back in the city, the socialites she once knew continued to change in their own ways. They had begun visiting shelters and hospitals, donating not just money but time. One of them, who used to spend her days in luxury boutiques, now helped organize food drives for single mothers. Another started a foundation for orphans. They didn't do it for attention anymore. They did it because they had finally understood what true wealth was. Sometimes they would visit the woman to seek advice. She never lectured them or made them feel guilty. She always listened with patience and warmth. When they asked her how she managed to stay content, she would simply say, "Be grateful for what you have and share it when you can. That's where happiness begins." Her words became a quiet truth they carried everywhere. One afternoon, the woman was walking through a park near her home when she saw a group of volunteers cleaning up litter. She stopped for a moment and smiled. Among them were some of the same people who had once judged her harshly. They waved when they saw her and she waved back. It warmed her heart to see how far they had come. She sat on a nearby bench watching children play and parents laugh. Life around her looked simple but beautiful. That's what she had always wanted. A world where people cared for one another. As the sun began to set, an elderly man sat beside her. It was the same gentleman who had first spoken kindly to her at that very first gala. His hair was whiter now, but his eyes were still kind. "You did it," he said softly. She turned to him, surprised. "Did what?" "You changed them," he said with a smile. "You changed the way people see goodness. That's no small thing." She looked down for a moment and then said quietly, "I didn't change them. They just needed to remember who they really are." The man nodded. "You reminded them then. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person brave enough to be different." They sat together in silence for a while, watching the orange glow of the sky fade into twilight. The sound of laughter filled the air. It was peaceful, calm, and full of life. Before leaving, the old man said, "You've given this city something money could never buy, and heart." That night, when she returned home, she placed the little boy's drawing from the ceremony on her desk beside the other pictures from her charity work. She looked at all of them, the hospitals, the schools, the smiling faces, and felt a deep, quiet happiness. Her phone buzzed with messages again, invitations, praise and offers for interviews, but she turned it off. None of that mattered to her. What mattered were the lives being rebuilt, the hope being restored, and the love that kept spreading. Before going to bed, she stood by her window and looked at the city lights glowing in the distance. She whispered softly, "If I can make even one person believe in kindness again, then I've done enough." The next morning, she went about her usual routine. She visited one of the schools she helped build, where children greeted her with excitement. They showed her their drawings, sang songs they had learned, and thanked her in shy voices. She laughed with them, hugged them, and told them, "One day you'll do the same for someone else. That's how the world becomes better." Those words stayed with the children for years. Some of them grew up to become teachers, doctors, and social workers. They told stories about a woman who taught them that generosity doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Time passed, but her influence didn't fade. Even after many years, her name continued to be spoken, not with awe for her wealth, but with respect for her heart. People remembered her not as the richest woman in the city, but as the one who gave without expecting anything in return. The socialites who once mocked her became some of her closest allies in charity work. Together, they transformed the meaning of luxury in their circles. It was no longer about showing off, but about showing kindness. They often said, "She made us see the world differently." In her later years, the woman continued living quietly, still helping, still smiling, still believing that small acts of love could heal big wounds. And in her heart, she carried no bitterness for the way she had once been treated. Instead, she felt grateful, because that cruelty had given her a chance to show the world what true grace looked like. One evening, as she sat in her garden with the same old cup of tea, she looked up at the stars and thought about her journey, the laughter, the insults, the discovery, the forgiveness, and the change. It all felt like a circle completed. She closed her eyes, smiled softly, and whispered, "This is enough." And though years passed, her story continued to be told. People would share it at gatherings in classrooms and online. They would say, "There was once a woman who walked into a room full of laughter and judgment, but instead of getting angry, she taught them kindness, and that became her legacy. Not her fortune, not her fame, but her heart. Her life proved that humility was stronger than pride, kindness louder than gossip, and goodness richer than gold. And somewhere, in the hearts of those she touched, that lesson lived on, quiet, steady, and eternal.